So welcome to the Bilgepumps Christmas special. What the frigate's going on with our Christmas? No, there have been multiple titles which have been considered during this one, and the title itself reflects that. I hope you enjoy it. I know it was a lot of fun and a lot of work to actually organise. The trouble is, when we were doing Bilgepumps, when we started it, we had the benefit of it being COVID, and none of us were leaving our homes, so we could organize it. We could get it going well and make everyone happy, and be able to adjust the time to suitably look after people and fit in. It's so much more difficult now. We're actually doing the things we're doing because all four of us, and I do say four of us because we of course had Sal, our special guest here, are incredibly annoyingly active people. We all seem to have full schedules. It's quite scary. And realistically, all of us need to sort of clone ourselves about 3 or 4 times. But that's the way we like it, life. That's the way we like it to be. We like to be busy. And so, I will admit now, this party ended up being in 2 parts because on the occasions we were trying to record it, we managed to get 3 of us there on one occasion, 3 of us there on another occasion, and then finished off with 2 of us there. So you have got the bit which is literally the first recording that was done, which was as 3 of us, which is myself, Sal, and Jamie, and then you've got myself and Drac, because life happened. Life happened. But we did all want to be involved. We all wanted to be part of this, so I hope you don't mind. I hope you enjoy it. I was considering chopping it up and putting in the sections next to each other, and so you could see the section of me talking with Jamie and Sal about this, and then me talking with Drac about this, and so I was doing that. But honestly, I felt that was kind of wrong because that wasn't what happened. And so I've left them, and there's going to be a little bit of me in between, and then it's going to start off. So it's 2 complete videos. So you see exactly what happened as it happened with the flow of the conversation. There's no fancy editing. And I have been doing more fancy editing lately, but I just didn't want to do it for Bilgepumps, because Bilgepumps was never about fancy editing. It was about the conversation. It was press record, and let's see what happened. And it seemed wrong to do anything different. So I hope you enjoy. Thank you very much for watching. Oh, good. The recording is started. So, we will hopefully be joined by Naval as this goes on, because whilst he suggested the time for us to get together, he's, of course, the one who's running late and most late when we actually get it. This is what happens. It's happened with this the whole time.
In all fairness, this is because of me missing the first call we were supposed to do together. So there's reasons for this.
Yes,
you're all busy men with families and professions, and
yeah, so, we're all having fun. But basically, this is the Bilgepumps Christmas special for 2025, and it's, well, I'm loosely titling it, "Why the Frigate Can't We Procure Frigates?" Because America's the latest example of this with the Constellation Class, but there are so many others. But before we get into that, we have to introduce everyone. So we're joined, of course, by special guest Sal Mercilagos, who is basically amazing and tells everyone what is going on with shipping. We are joined by the wonderful Jamie Seedell, who is the ever so evenly tempered Australian. Evenly tempered. For an Australian, incredibly evenly tempered. You're permanently angry. You're like Admiral King in that way. And there's, of course, me, Dr.
That was a low blow. That was a low blow.
And we should be joined by Drac at some point, who is running a little bit behind time. So, yeah. What can we say? Where do we start with the Frigate Programs? Because the fun thing is, the amount of people tell me
I guess the first thing, obviously the first thing is, why was the Constellation chosen in the first place? I mean, that was a bit of a major break from US naval shipbuilding tradition. because it went with a European design. I mean, is that the fundamental problem here? It's European?
I think, well, to answer your first question the first part of the question, Jamie, is, I mean, we had at the very dawn of the 21st century here a plan where the U.S. was going to build a new cruiser, a new destroyer, and this new littoral combat ship. It was all set to be introduced right around September 11th, as a matter of fact. It was going to be right after that. And what we wound up getting was LCS, because that was the first one that was on track to be built. Everything else went the way of the birds because of the global war on terror, everything that happened. And really, we kind of took our eye off the ball. And, decision was made to kind of continue Arleigh Burkes until, I guess, the dawn of time. I'm not exactly sure. They're the modern equivalent of a 74. We're just going to keep building them over and over again until we're out of them. But then they, looked for a frigate, and I think they, after the disaster that was LCS, and I don't know what else to call it but that, because it didn't achieve anything it set out to do except for going very fast. Some of them. They looked for something, and I think they got
not for very long.
Yeah, and not very long at all. You're right, and I think they got sold on the concept of an off-the-shelf design. I think that was the big selling point. We can get a FREMM, and the number that they use consistently is 85% commonality. We're just going to have to change 15% to meet it. And anybody who knows Naval Sea Systems Command, NAVC, knows that they're not going to adopt a European any design that doesn't meet their requirements. One of the problems the U.S. Navy has is it's got 100 years of battle damage, experience, and it's going to make any ship as survivable as possible, and that's not what a FREMM was in their mind.
I think so it was because it was a European design. It wasn't, it was that typical problem, which I suppose Australia seems to demonstrate quite frequently. Quote unquote, buy something off the shelf. That's not what we want. Therefore, let's spend 10 times more turning it into what we want. It just seems to be that kind of mistake that happens over and over and over and over again.
But Jamie, it's less risky to buy off the shelf because then you've got a known quantity to buy. It's not risky to buy it. You're buying something which is off the shelf. There's no risk you're going to develop a pup. It's going to be something which works because it's off the shelf. It's no risk.
And that might actually happen if you keep it off the shelf.
Well, let's be honest. With the Constellation Class, the trouble is they converted it round. They start off with it's going to have 85% commonality. It ended up the final design with about 15% commonality. And you see, this is the trouble, because once you get in, as anyone who's ever done anything to do with naval construction will tell you, once you start changing one thing, so that means you have to start moving other things around. And then it means you then have to change other things to accommodate the things moving around. And by the time you're finished, you've changed everything.
Which in itself is an issue too, especially when you sit there and say, all right, we're going to cut the keel and cut steel and start building this. Like, how do you build this thing when you don't have the plan figured out? I think it goes even to a bigger root issue is, what is the mission of this ship? Because I never have been clear on what the mission is.
Sal, for that, I can tell you the mission, because someone put a comment the other day which was so full of so many buzzwords, I just cannot
Is it the Office of the Navy, the Chief of Naval Operations? Because they're great on that.
No, let's see. Apparently, the role of the Constellation Class frigate warfare mission was to combine its moving target indication radar with hypersonic and ballistic tracking space sensors as a means to track AGVs so that Burke-class destroyers could lock onto them and destroy them with HGV intercept missiles.
Okay. Sounds great.
No, it wasn't. At no point was that the mission of the Constellation Class frigate.
No,
I've got that this whole long comment which is full of these buzzwords, and I'm sitting there going, no, that wasn't the frigate's mission at all. I can't even respond directly to that poor commenter, because it would just be a long list of, I don't know where you've got this from, and it's wrong. And I know at a certain point I start to look mean when I say that too many times to someone.
Okay, so you've got Constellation cancelled. You've got, 3 ships under build at the moment?
Two they're going to build.
2. Okay, so they're going to finish them off, even though they haven't got the plans finished for them. That'll be interesting. The British frigates, you've got one in the water, Glasgow now, haven't you?
Yeah, we've got two in the water.
Finishing off. We haven't heard much about that. I don't know whether that's because of the Official Secrets Act or...
No, it's travelling on quite nicely. The reason it's not being discussed a lot is because more's been talked about the fact to deal with Norway, and they don't want to discuss the Type 26 program because then they have to admit they're going to have to order a third batch, because basically they've promised at least one of our Batch 2 frigates for the Norwegians so they can deliver them on time. So
and Australia's decided to go with the Megami Japanese frigate, which as their backup, or their second tier frigate. I don't know what
basically you had a choice for light frigate between Type 31 program and the Japanese program, and very sensibly they've gone for the Japanese model, because I will say that having seen them up close in Japan,
there supposed to be a lot of compatibility between the I forgot its designation, the one of your frigates we're buying and the light frigate?
No, there isn't. They're built by completely different companies and they have completely different origins. And I do realise that some people are going around trying to claim they have commonality between them, but that's basically news to the Royal Navy, because they're using completely different command and control systems. Completely. So there is no overlap at all between the two classes. Pretty much, I don't think they even have the same type of engine control.
Okay, so again, then that brings us to the next question then, which is, what is a frigate in 2030 or 20? Actually, no. I think it was yesterday. The American CNO said that the new frigate will be launched in 2028, and he was predicting that the production of these ships will be faster than if they'd gone ahead with the Constellation. That to me indicates that they've got a well-matured, balanced design ready and raring to go, because for that to happen, of course, you're going to need to get the whole production chain spitting things out rapidly, just like they did with the Liberty ships. Is that correct, Sal?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a report out from, I think it's Defense News, talking about that Secretary of the Navy Phelan at a private lunch or dinner talked about the fact that they're going to convert the National Security Cutter that was built down in Pascagoula, down at Huntington Ingalls down there. They built 10 of those for the U.S. Coast Guard. And Huntington Ingalls had a plan back 10 years ago, more than that actually now, to offer that up as the frigate. Basically, let's take the National Security Cutter, let's put some missile cells on it, let's update it, and we can use this as a frigate. And they just canceled the 11th one they were going to build early, and I think that's what they're planning to do. I think that's the most likely thing, because that's a mature design. They haven't basically destroyed, all the dies and everything they've used to build that, and they can start pumping it out. I only hope if they do that they don't go nuts trying to make changes. They just go ahead and start building a tier 1. Basically,
Sal.
I know.
Sal, in the nicest way. Hopes and wishes. I know it's Christmas. I know it's the season of it, but oh, good Lord. Why?
All right.
No, give up on it.
I'm American. We have this kind of rosy picture of the world where everything.
The thing that worries me there is they cancelled the 11th one. If I'd actually have more confidence it would have commonality if the 11th one was still building, because then it'd be going into a hot production line. But with cancelling 11th one, there's going to be just enough cooldown that some people are going to have time for bright ideas.
Yeah, I agree.
This way, though, as a devil's advocate here, a 10-year-old frigate design in a 2030s environment is kind of, we're talking coal powered versus oil powered versus turbines, because you're entering a world now of drones and hypersonic missiles. The threat environment is drastically different, and to be brutally honest, is there room for a frigate in this kind of very hot, very intense type of combat? I mean, just look what's happened to the small ships of the Russians in the Black Sea. They were just completely useless.
Yes and no. I think there is trouble. Too much can be drawn from the Russian experience because, well, even the Russians' premier flagship vessel down there was found to be not in the best of condition.
1970s vintage. Yeah.
Yes, so in the nicest way, I'm sorry, if your flagship is in that state, then I do not trust any of your ships to be in any better state. I'm sorry, I just don't, because your flagship is supposed to be your flagship. And I do speak of this as a nation which has entire compartments closed off on a couple of their aircraft carriers because of issues with them, which they need to fit, which is just getting fixed by one of them being in dry dock. It happens, but you fix them. You don't usually let them fester for a few years. I think also it's got to be worked out what does an American frigate equal versus what everyone else does, because again, it's kind of like it's kind of the reverse of what we saw in the War of 1812, Age of Sail era, where the Americans had the heavy frigates, and they were far stronger than the British frigates because the British needed mass. They needed a frigate because they needed presence everywhere. They needed something which was they had ships of the line and big things to deal with the fighting. They didn't need that. So what the Americans necessarily need from a frigate actually can possibly be dealt with a 10-year design, because what they need is something which is mature, viable, reliable, and can be a task group asset, and can basically turn up, round up numbers, provide the ASW, provide the presence. They have other vessels for the other duties. It's for them, it's slightly different. If you were talking as building a frigate, if you're Britain or Australia, where that frigate is going to be one of your core fighting capability, then you've got a different conversation about what frigate design you need to be going for. But I think for the Americans, it's kind of like they need to be going for the Oliver Hazard Perry, which, let's be honest, the OHP, as glorious as it was never the most modern asset in the room. It was the most reliable asset in the room. And I think that makes sense. That does make sense to me. You know, for the Americans to be going for a reliability asset. I'm just, there's just part of me just really worried they go with the Freedom Class variant frigate. I just hope they don't. I really hope they don't, because I've seen the mock-ups of that, and there is nothing improved by scaling the Freedom Class up. There is absolutely nothing improved by scaling the Freedom Class up. Nothing at all.
The out of the box options are to adopt, you know, a South Korean design and start doing that and actually build that either in South Korea and transition it over into the United States, because South Korea has gotten in bed with the U.S. big time when it comes to shipbuilding right now. I mean, Hanwha is everywhere. I mean, South Korea just built a frigate in a year for Philippines. I mean, just second of their new frigate class came in, which are beautiful ships. They're really nice, and they, you know, have a lot of the capabilities out there for you. The other option they have is to go autonomous. Came back from a show where Saronic had a platform out there. They were featuring this vessel called the Marauder, which is their big kind of, it's a 180-foot autonomous surface vessel, 5,400-mile range, 12 to 25 knots, can carry about 4 40-foot containers on board. You get 4 or 5 of those, you put missiles on them, you put sensors on them. They can be your kind of de facto frigate in some ways if you have control units with them. That may be the option.
That's the question you have, is having the control units with them. And I see what I see with the modern crude ships, the frigates and the destroyers, I see them ending up with those vessels as their sort of wingmen. They're going with them, and I see basic. My view is the future frigate program and the future destroyer program are basically building the vessels which are going to be the core of those groups. And this frigate, this is another reason why I think a 10-year-old design is fine. As long as there's space for the command facilities in it, that it can actually coordinate those sort of vessels, it'll be fine. But I don't think you can use those vessels for presence yet, because the trouble is there's so much of presence, and you and I, all of us know this, which comes down to hello, and shaking people by the hand, and and also there's the fact that, as Trump has established, you know, if you shoot a drone or damage a drone, it's not necessarily a cause of war. So, the case of it's got to be a crude asset for it to be a viable deterrent in that regards and that scenario, and that's a problem. But there again, let's be honest, there is going to be a difference between touching an aerial drone and touching a boat. Let's be honest. If you touch the boats, the US and the British do have a habit of both getting very upset if you touch our boats. Just don't touch the boats. It's not good. But that's the thing is, I agree on the uncrewed assets. They're coming in. They're going to be really useful. But I see them more as now task groups becoming task groups of task groups, where the destroyer, as I keep saying, the frigates and destroyers these days are the ASW cruiser and the air defense cruiser, and the uncrewed assets are what are going to be the equivalent to the World War II destroyers, destroyer escorts, frigates, sloops, those things, providing the massive hulls in the water. But that also adds another problem to what we're building, because what we're building, do they reflect that? I would argue in the UK the Type 31 is actually better than Type 26 for that role because of its flexible spacing and the amount of space it's got to actually take on command functions and have different boxes, if you want containers put in there, for command functions.
But that was the problem Constellation ran into, because they built a 7,000-ton frigate that was supposed to have, I think it's 350 tons of free space, and now they're 1,000 tons overweight on where they're at, because they just put everything in the world on it, because what they created was a baby Burke. They wanted everything that a Burke...
They wanted a destroyer instead of a frigate. Which is why I say, what's the role of a frigate in the modern world? Because it always seems to end up trying to turn the frigate into a destroyer.
Yep. And that's the problem we've had. Because we've lost the cruisers, there goes your air defense. Destroyers now are your primary air defense, but they're also your primary ASW, because we got rid of the frigates, because the LCS can't do ASW, so it's got to be the destroyers. So destroyers are the jack of all trade, and I don't think the Navy can really take themselves and assign a specific mission to a ship. If the frigate's going to do ASW, let it do ASW. I mean, that's what it needs to do. It really does, because we don't have a true ASW platform, because the Burkes are not great at that in many ways. And LCS was, for some strange reason, a 40-knot ship with a jet drive is not going to be a good ASW platform. Who would have guessed? I don't know who thought about that being a great idea, but anyway.
It gets fun. It really does. I have to say again with that one, what I see happening is what you have to do is almost just go, look, all ships have to be generous to extent. But okay, a frigate means it's primarily ASW, a destroyer means it's primary air defense, and we have to accept that. And you to an extent do have to accept that in your roles if you're organizing these ships and what you're doing. Because again, one of the reasons why a destroyer tends to be bigger than a frigate is because of the size it needs to be to have the stability to have the sensors up as high as they need to be for air defense. Now, admittedly, again, that can change with drones, and there's the whole idea the British have of a tethered drone radar system, which is sometimes mooted for the Type 83 coming, that they're going to have their radar sensors on a tethered drone, which will orbit above the ship somehow. And
as a World War I model right
Merlin.
Don't get me started on some of the ideas they're coming up with. I was sitting there looking at some of the concepts recently and just going, oh.
I could see that would be rather subject to weather and whatever else.
Yeah, there were so many issues. I was sitting there thinking, no, I don't think that's a good idea. I do not think that, because they're going, it'll be great. It'll be able to be about 150 foot above the ship. So right in the area where there's going to be really, really difficult winds and weather. Not high enough to be cruising altitude, not low enough to be actually able to be supported by the ship. Oh, that just sounds like a recipe for an issue.
And when that volley of very hot missile air goes past.
And also then there was the discussion of, well, why couldn't we put it up a mile up? Because the speed it would have to be going at to be able to maintain station above a ship, which let's say is doing 28 knots, which the ships can do, on the surface, when it's a mile up above its head, is going to have to be very interesting for it to keep the cable fine and in position. And the whole idea was, it's a lovely idea. It's something which I could see being a very interesting idea. I just don't think it's going to happen. I just don't think it works in practice. No. And I think this is also a lot of the trouble you have with the drones and the hypersonic missiles, because when we sit there looking at the hypersonic missiles, okay, they're very, very fast missiles. And that does present some mathematical issues. That does present some issues. But also, in the nicest way, large missiles coming in at high speed to attack you has kind of been the modus operandi since about the 1950s.
Oh, sure. But it's sort of like comparing a Sopwith Camel to an F-18, though, isn't it? I mean, this is the point. That these hypersonic missiles are not only fast, they're also potentially guided, and they can also by nature of their need for speed, can go a lot further than your average cruise missile as well. So,
oh yes, but also the fact is, if they miss, they're going to miss by further. But leave that to one side.
true.
The fun thing is when you're dealing with the hypersonics and dealing with the sensors coming in is you sit there and people talk about them and go, so there's no option being developed. So you sit there and go, well, there's the Japanese working on their air defense railgun, which actually looks to be doing pretty well. There's numerous people working on lasers. And we all know the hypersonics are already dealing with a lot of heat issues. You start adding onto the heat, you're going to create even more problems. That's what the lasers are basically doing. So the thing is, I see them as being a very dangerous weapon system coming in. I certainly wouldn't want to be on a ship being hit by one. But I'm too much of a historian. I've spent too much of my time reading through history of every next generation of weapon system coming in being the weapon which is going to kill everything, sink everything, destroy everything, and then a few years later, there's a counter to it. And its tactics and its technology, etc., comes in, and it's still a dangerous weapon system, but there are counters to it, so it goes back to a more level playing field. And sometimes it switches the other way, and sometimes people are going, oh, our defensive systems are so great now, nothing will ever penetrate, we're invincible. And you sit there and go, that's not going to be like that for long, is it? But
just getting back to Constellation and frigates. So, we're hearing, you were saying earlier how, the United States Navy's sort of contract to being around the Burkes and around the carriers, and with very little in between. There's been talk in recent months of this new golden fleet. Is there are there ideas bouncing around for replacement cruisers? Are there concepts bouncing around for a replacement Burke in sort of the US naval community to create this golden fleet by the 2030s?
I think the question about the replacement of the cruiser or battleship they keep talking about is I don't think anyone's envisioning an Iowa class battleship. What they're envisioning is a larger, longer range vessel that can endure longer out in combat than what we currently have.
And battleship's a very sexy name. Yeah, so.
It is, yes. But the problem you have with a Burke, for example, is it can't cross the Pacific. I mean, just can't. I mean, it just doesn't have the range to do it. It could barely get across the Atlantic without having an oiler tied up to the side, let alone trying to hurry a Nimitz class or a Ford class carrier from the East Coast to the West Coast.
Well, that's why you used to have the nuclear powered cruisers, wasn't it? That was what the soul job the nuclear cruisers. And yep. I keep saying they're the biggest loss the US Navy has had because they've. Basically, it means you're in the thing that you need them for a peer conflict. You don't need them for the conflicts you've had for recent years, but you do need them for a peer conflict because that's when you might need to do these big movements of forces, and you haven't got the things which enable you to move a carrier.
And that's what we saw. Was it last year when Bighorn ran aground out in the Arabian Sea, and all of a sudden we had a carrier strike group. The Lincoln was out there with no replenishment vessel, and all of a sudden, they were out of fuel, and they literally had to strip half their escorts away, and they were one destroyer guarding a nuclear aircraft carrier until they could get a kind of a temporary measure in place with a commercial tanker to come out and do them. So I think the golden fleet
Australia wouldn't have been able to help because both of our brand new tankers are in for repairs already.
Yeah. So I mean, golden fleet is notional, but my fear, Jamie, is always this: is what has happened in ship production or ship procurement, I should say, is by the time we get a design to the point that it's mature, ready to build, we're already behind the power curve. I mean, because you're building designs that are going to be 10 years old by the time. This is the problem with Constellation. Constellation kept getting kicked back. I mean, they were talking about not hitting, initial operations until 2030. It was getting to be insane. They can't even build a concept. As much as I hate, littoral combat ships because I think they were just a waste of a decade or so. At least they're out there running. You can do things with them. At least they're hulls. You got to do something with them. They're just very limited hulls because of the speed and the fuel and what they can carry because they're aluminum and you can't put much weight on them. But at least they're built. This is the problem we get. I think one of the things that NSC does, the National Security Cutters, is that's a design they can start building right now. It may not be a mature design, but at least they can start building it. But that's still going to be 4 years until you see probably the first one of those come out. So we're talking about 2030 again still.
And I'd add in this is the thing, sort of, I've been trying, I've done a video, and it's going to come out before this one does, on my channel, probably on the previous Friday, which is, I'm talking about the Zumwalts, and the big thing about the Zumwalts that annoyed me was when they cancelled and stopped the building one, when they could have just literally gone, okay, let's just take off the advanced gun system, put Mark 41 VLS in the aft cell, in the aft gun, put 5-inch gun in the forward gun, and change the radar system, and we've got a perfectly good general purpose destroyer. Instead, they've gone back to the Burkes. And I love the Burkes, but the Burkes were 1970s design, started building in the 1980s, and have been delivered from the 1990s. And so you're dealing with basically what is, and it has been upgraded technology, I will admit, but you're still building something which fundamentally the naval architecture of it is 50 years old.
And not only that, we're building less of them than we were in the 90s. So that what that means is you're dealing with a ship that's 30 to 40 years old. We're going to start retiring them. They got to be retired. They can't be going past their service life. They're already going to get stretched a little bit now. But we're going to wind up going down in terms of overall numbers because we're only got 2 yards to build them, and they're not at capacity that they were in the 90s and even in the early 2000s, because Bath had to turn everything off to build the Zumwalts. Like you said, I agree. The Zumwalts were a hull. You could at least use the hull. Or here's a crazy idea. If you're going to put a 155 millimeter gun on it, maybe use the same gun the Army uses, and you can get, comparable ammunition and be able to use it. But I know we're talking crazy stuff here.
It's the 4.5 all over again.
Yeah.
Well, to be fair, with that, you could have still used a same ammunition. Basically, the cost of the ammunition is the sensors, etc., and the shell. So you could use a longer shell. You could use a longer caliber 6-inch gun. You could just have commonality on the sensors, and you would get all the savings. Because let's be honest, the shell itself and the explosive in it is not the expensive part of the shell these days. It really isn't. The expensive part is the sensors and the components which make the shell go bang, and all the stuff which make it smart. As long as you've got commonality on that, you're fine.
And what makes the Zumwalts attractive is the power. I mean, they generate huge amounts of power, which is because, again, they're not destroyers; they're cruisers. They're basically they're cruisers, and that's what they should have been considered at the time. But this also goes back to the frigate argument in what everybody calls a frigate. I mean, the Germans are calling destroyers frigate. Everyone calls everything frigates, but they're really not. And I think this is the other element we get into is back to the mission of what do we want this stupid ship to do? If you wanted to escort, commercial ships through the Red Sea in a high drone area, well, you need Burkes. We already figured that out. I mean, you need air defense warships for that, because we saw what happened when the EU sent ships down there that were not compatible for that. So, why would you send something that's not compatible into that area? Why would you send a frigate into that high drone area? However, just looked at the thing from H.I. Sutton the other day with the Chinese long-range underwater drones. What are we doing off the west coast of the U.S. to prepare for these unmanned, battery-powered or diesel-operated long-range drones to appear off the west coast of the United States? Where's the ASW for that? Are we going to be using fast attack submarines? Because the submarine community in the U.S., and that's the other element that's at play here, is that the submarine mafia in the U.S. Navy is in full force, and they're torpedoing as much surface ship construction as they can because they want to focus on building more submarines, and that's their big focus. And AUKUS is pushing them in that way. It's a big fight in the U.S. Navy that doesn't get a lot of attention I think it deserves.
I think that's probably because they always do feel like they're second-class citizens for some reason. They both feel like they're the most important part of the service and second-class citizens simultaneously.
They're not right now. Look at all the top players in the U.S. Navy right now. They're submariners. And so, I mean, they're in a very dominant position right now.
I realize that, but they always have that mindset. I've dealt with it. It's the same in the Royal Navy. I've dealt with it in the Australian Navy, and even the French Navy. Submariners always seem to both feel they are the most important part of their service, and also the most bullied and put down upon part of their service. And you sort of go, well, there is a measure of things correct here, but there's also every single one of the senior officers in your service is a submariner. How are you claiming to be the most put down upon at this point?
Getting back to what is a frigate? Is that move to submarines, as in terms of rebalancing forces, the right way to go, given that, let's face it, frigates don't really seem to serve a purpose.
Well, they do.
Well, I think they do serve a purpose. I think that the problem is the Navy doesn't want to, at least my Navy doesn't want to identify that as a mission, which is basically, doing anti-submarine and escort missions, which it deems important. That's what the Knoxes did. That's what the OHPs did. But again, that was a mission that they were very quick to get rid of at the end of the Cold War because they didn't see it being an issue anymore. And I don't think they see it as a mission right now.
No, and I think also there's part of the trouble is this, and I'm going to just put this in because this is one reason why the NSC might be a good option to go for, and I'm going to add it in before Jamie gets his next point because I have an idea what his next point is going to be. The NSC currently is involved in dealing with small submarines which keeps trying to get in underwater. They're called narco subs. And so, therefore, it is actually, they're already, the Coast Guard in many ways have been the ones who kept the anti-submarine warfare service going in the US war structure because they've been dealing with it on a regular basis. And I think it's almost optional going for the NSC, therefore, in that argument, because it is kind of the one which is the proven design, because it's hunting down narco boats. Although, yeah, that's a whole other bundle of fun at the moment.
Yeah, no, I was just simply, and I've actually forgotten what the hell I was going to say there. So,
no. I think going back to Constellation again, it wasn't a surprise it got canceled. It was actually the least surprising thing. I think what surprised me is it took so long for the administration to come in and cancel it. I think they jumped the gun to announce it because they were worried about Fincantieri going under, and so they want to keep a shipyard up and running. It's been interesting watching this evolution from this Secretary of the Navy because right afterwards there was this announcement that they're going to build these landing ship mediums. They're going to build into the Damen LST 100 class. And the question, you can't help but ask right off the bat. It's like, okay, what's going to happen when you bring this foreign design over into the United States? And he was very careful about that. He sat there and said that there's going to be a vessel service manager, that any change orders are going to go through his desk on Friday at 5:00. He's devoted an hour at the end of the week to look at service changes for ship design, which I'm not crazy about being the last hour of the week that he's looking at those things. But, he seems to want to, create this atmosphere of building. The problem the U.S. has, it's not being successful at building anything. Everything is behind schedule. I mean, the Ford-class carriers have been pushed out. Kennedy is going to take 10 years to build. 10 years. And we've kept Nimitz and Eisenhower running longer than expected. It is just a complete and utter, I would argue, disaster in many ways. Meanwhile, the Chinese are pumping out Type 55s, Type 52s, their new landing ships. I mean, it's a ridiculous number that we're seeing come out. And their submarines are getting better, which is the thing that we don't seem to want to talk about a lot, that their submarine technology is improving dramatically, very quickly.
Well, that's the thing, is if you're building enough and you're prepared to do iterative building, you can improve quite dramatically, quite quickly. And that's what the Chinese are prepared to do. They are prepared to do iterative building. They are prepared to, how to put this, unlike when you come to, the Western sort of world, etc., with the pace of construction we've got going on, where we go, that will invalidate the entire previous class. Or the example I would give is the UK. We've got spare slots in our yards. We could have been building more boats than we're building at the time in terms of submarines. There is no reason we should have stopped Astute production to start the Dreadnought production. And one of the reasons why we keep having trouble with availability is when we have the submarines available, we're using them very, very hard, and we've only got 6 boats. And for some reason, once you've got 1 or 2 of those in long-term maintenance, and you're down to 4 boats, and then you're pushing them around the world the moment you get them available, it leads to you having gaps in boats availability. And, people go, it's terrible, it's such a waste of money. And you go, yes, it really is a waste of money, because, by the way, the reason these boats cost this much is because we spent X amount on research and development, and then it costs Y amount to actually build each individual boat. And you notice that Y amount gets less with every boat you build, because they get cheaper as you get more experience in building them, and as the production line gets more mature, and as you're adding on bits. So actually, if we built the 7th and 8th Astutes, they would have been the 2 cheapest boats we'd have built. They'd have made a whole design as a class overall look cheaper per unit, and we'd have that extra capacity so we wouldn't be having the gaps.
And this is the thing.
Makes sense.
You
Which
keep.
is why it won't happen.
This is the thing. When we talk about the Type 45, it's the same thing with Britain. And this is a great thing. The Type 45s. One of the reasons they're cut short is they weren't general purpose enough. They were too air defence orientated. Of course, they didn't pay to put the Mark 41 VLS in it. They just fitted it for, not with. And they didn't want to build the last ones because they also didn't, they wanted to jump into the carrier program. They wanted to jump into things. You sit there and go, would it have really disrupted the carrier program if you'd completed the last 2 or 3 Type 45s? No, it wouldn't have. It would have been very useful. And we'd have had 9 vessels to share the role. So instead of us being down to 7 frigates and 6 Type 45s, we'd have had 3 more extra hulls. And those 3 hulls, as we all know here, 3 extra hulls, a group of 9 to operate from rather than a group of 6. It opens up a whole lot more capability, because that usually means you're going to have 4 or 5 available rather than 2.
Well, but this also causes your havoc across your industrial base, because now all of a sudden you stop construction and you have a lag time till you start the new construction of the new design. And what we see happens is the same thing, is that we fire, or lay off workers. And now all of a sudden we literally have to train an entirely new workforce to build whatever ship we want. This is the fear I have with starting the national security cutters, because fortunately we're still building some, but some elements, some of that workforce is going to be let go by now, because we're not doing some of the fabrication, because it's now at a different part of the ship construction process, and now you got to bring it back up. Well, those workers weren't sitting around waiting for this to happen. They've gone off to do different things, and it's very difficult to relocate workers. No one wants to move anymore. It's hard to get workers to come work in a shipyard outside in Mississippi or up in Maine, especially in the wintertime. So we were just having a real big challenge with getting our ship construction base going.
And also, what we haven't discussed is what's the effect on the Coast Guard to not getting their 11th and their 12th of their planned Coast Guard, planned large cutters, and these are the big cutters, the biggest of the Coast Guard's units. They're basically their high status units for their Coast Guard duties and all the duties they do. What's there going to be on knock-on impact of them not getting 2 of those units when they've gone from planning on having a future of having 12, and they're now going to have only 10? There's also that impact as well.
Well, it wouldn't be a problem, Alex, because we were going to build 25 offshore patrol cutters, and the first one was supposed to be built, but now all of a sudden we've just canceled the contract with Eastern Shipbuilding to build half of the 4 that they were building. They're going to build 2, which aren't done. They're going to have to be towed somewhere to be finished. And Austal, which is picking up the rest of the contract, just cut steel on the first one. So what should have been last year, the very first commissioning, is not going to be done for another year or 2. And these 25 OPCs were supposed to replace the 200, and I forget which ones, the 210s and then the medium, the Bear class that's out there. I mean, some of the 210s right now that are out there are almost 60 years old. And now we're not even going to get this offshore patrol cutter that's built, which is, again, just a medium-sized cutter. And it again, right in the, kind of a frigate size, that sweet butter zone right there. And we're not going to get them built. Eastern Shipbuilding, which got the contract for us in Panama City, Florida, never should have gotten the contract in the first place. They literally built that ship on a dirt field. They got hit by a hurricane. They were just punching above their weight to get this contract, and they've never been able to build the ship. And now Austal Maritime is going to build it, but Austal has got multiple contracts. They've just canceled 2 contracts to build fleet tugs. And that should be the simplest thing in the world to build, a tug. I mean, it's a fleet tug. It's a commercial fleet tug. And they canceled 2 of them because the first, I think it's 3, maybe 4, are so over budget that they got to take the money from the last 2 to finish the first ones. It's just, I mean, I don't even know what to say anymore. It's just,
So that brings us to the final stage of this discussion, which is, me sitting over here in Australia, not being anywhere near as close to naval engineering as you guys, but I'm reading of scuttlebutt on Capitol Hill, which seems to involve 2 diametrically opposed extremes to solving the problem. One is prosecuting and pursuing legally failed contractors for not delivering what they promised. I mean, this, of course, involves taking CEOs to court, finding big companies, finding big shareholder groups for for failing to do what they've claimed to do. And on the other side of the spectrum, and both of these seem to be bouncing around inside the White House at the moment, is taking a leaf out of the Communist Party of China's book and nationalize the ship construction industry. Now, my understanding was that the solution in World War II was to combine both, that you threatened, you actually pursued contractors with the full force of the law, as opposed to the wet towel. And if they didn't produce, then you took them over. Is that my correct understanding of history? And does that have a place to solve this crisis?
I think I think your understanding is exactly correct, and I've heard both those options being flipped around about what to do. I think one of the problems I have is the U.S. Navy over the past few years, especially the CNO and past Secretary Navies, have really just pillared the shipyards. I mean, they just have, and I don't. The shipyards have a responsibility in here, but I don't think they're the major problem. I think when you have, I forget what the number is, X amount of shipbuilding programs in the U.S. Navy, and all of them but one is on track, on budget. That's not shipyards. That's something else that's commonality, because you're building across multiple shipyards with all those programs. The commonality in it is the Navy. And I think that's one of the problems. One of the things when you look at successes in the history of the U.S. Navy programs, one of the things they did is they appointed someone, you're in charge of this, and you're in charge till it's done. That's it. Polaris, the Nimitz class carriers, we're going to put you in charge of this until you start, showing that you can demonstrate this. I think there's been 3 different program managers for the Constellation Class. I have no idea how many there was for littoral combat ships. I mean, again, we're just getting the last littoral combat ship out right now. We're just getting the Mine Hunters online. And this is a ship that was delivered in 2014, the first one, or 2012, something around there. I think you've got to have responsibility, and whether it's a Navy officer or a civilian, in the Navy, SES or whatever it is, in charge, there's no responsibility. I mean, the Royal Navy did that all the time. You're in charge. This is what you're going to do. This is
it used to be quite simple. There's the third Sea Lord who's in charge of all the programs, and then they'd have the Director of Naval Construction next to them, who's their senior architect. And that would also be commanding, and then they'd have their senior admiral of rear admiral engineering as well with them, and then for that structure would then be replicated for first of all for every section there was a guy who was responsible, it's equivalent structure responsible for carriers, and then for every individual program. So if there's a carrier class, they'd have their own structure again, and or destroyer class, etc. at each set point level down, where there'd be those set of 3 people responsible, and it goes up. And so the third Sea Lord is responsible for setting the tone for all the construction and deciding all of that. And then the people who are responsible at sort of the next level down are responsible for making sure those schedules are being kept. And then the people below that are responsible for the individual ships and keeping track of the programs. And I think this is part of the problem. You've seen a lot of this is got rid of for 2 reasons. One of the problems I see coming up quite regularly is people going, we need to cut the civil service side of the armed forces. And that means you become more dependent upon the commercial companies for your experience and your knowledge. And yes, that's cheaper, but it also means you don't have your own independent knowledge bank to argue back with them. This is one of the reasons why I like Royal Dockyards, and I really wish Britain had kept the Royal Dockyards. Because the great way the Royal Navy used to argue with companies when they tried to go, it's going to cost this much money. So they turn around to the Royal Dockyard, which also built ships, and go, so how much would it cost you to build this? The Royal Dockyard would give a quote. The Royal Navy would turn round to the commercial shipyards, and go, so this is, if you guys, nicest way, are competing with this, it costs us this much to build it in our own shipyard. And they would often build, when they design the class structure, they'd build 1 or 2 in the Royal Dockyard as a check. So they could then, if the other yards tried to push up the cost, they'd go, nah, we know how much this costs.
That sounds like, a typical kind of radical European solution. It's you're combining socialism there with capitalism. That can't happen.
The thing is, the great thing about the Royal Dockyards was they were not about socialism at all. They were the best method to keep control of the natural mind of the Englishman to be rampantly aggressive in their pursuit of profit is to have a system whereby we have the knowledge to disagree with it. That was the case made for the Royal Dockyard. It was because the British were supposed to be rampantly pursuant of profit that you had to have this as a check, because otherwise it would be an exigence on the national purse and cause them to have to raise taxes. And they didn't want to raise taxes. So, literally, they have the Royal Dockyards so they can keep track on prices, so they can keep the security going, but not have to raise taxes too much to deal with people who'll be rapidly pursuing profits.
Jamie, we did very similar thing in the U.S. And unfortunately, what we've done now is I was talking to some shipyard executives not too long ago, and one of the things they've gotten rid of is their naval architects, their designers, because they don't have enough shipbuilding need to have naval architects 100% employed, so they contract out for them all the time. So they got to come in and do the contract work. Meanwhile, what they do have more than enough is employees of Navy Sea Systems Command, NAVSEA, living there, who are looking at the ship construction on a daily. I mean, one of the bright moves they did was this idea. It's like, what will be improve efficiency is this. Instead of Navy Sea Systems Command being in Washington, D.C., let's move them into the shipyard to be right next to the ship so that those people can oversee. And what you got was, in Newport News, for example, is 800 to 1,000 NAVSEA employees who have to justify their work by going down and telling shipyard workers what they're doing right and wrong and what I need for you to change on every iteration of this design that has been basically already done. And it's got to go through every change order it can, because you have to do integrated systems. And so you can't just change anything without understanding how it impacts every other system on the ship. And what you wind up with is again, cutting steel on a ship that's designed is not complete yet. It's like building a house. You know, when you haven't designed the first floor and it's a 2-story house, it makes absolutely zero sense. That's why I thought if you're going to do Constellation right, you take the FREMM, you modify maybe just the gun and weapon systems, anything that's very kind of easy to change. Start building 10 of those, get them started to be built. And in the meantime, you tinker around and you come up with your Flight 2, which is going to be, this is the American derivation of the FREMM. This is what we want to do. But we couldn't do that. And instead, what we got was, again, a ship that was 15% overweight and just impossible to build within the confines that were set out. We put too much on it. It turned into, you know, it's the classic Pentagon's war. It turned into the armored personnel carrier that becomes the M2 Bradley. It's that story that we talk about, which is apocryphal. It's not exactly accurate, but that's the analogy everyone loves to go with. And what we wind up with is a zebra.
It is apocryphal, but it's also not exactly so. It's not so inaccurate that it's not also got a grain of truth. It's basically, I usually go, you must remember, this is a movie. It is done. It is hammed up for the audience, but it's not far enough from reality that historians are exactly comfortable with it.
No, they're grains of truth. There are a lot of grains of truth in there.
Yeah,
it's another. So in conclusion, it's another example of what we constantly sort of come back to here in the Bilgepumps: perfection being the enemy of adequacy.
And it's not even perfection of the role, because first of all, if you need to define the role, and as I said, frigate is ASW. Frigate is ASW, destroyer is air defense. That's their primary roles. That's what they need to be able to do the other roles, because you can't have a ship which can't do the other roles. But they need to be primary. It's like I go with frigates. I go, look, in a nice way. They have the point defense missile systems, not area air defense missile systems. That's because their purpose is to be able to defend themselves, not defend the task group. And therefore they have also the big sensors and the big computers for ASW. And they have probably a big hangar, because they're going to need a helicopter that's crewed, and they're going to need a lot of uncrewed aviation assets as well from now on, those sort of things. That makes sense. It's the laugh I have is when you look at the British designing the Type 83, we're shamelessly trying to not admit that what we've done is basically we're creating a cruiser. And it's a full cruiser. Because, shamelessly, the Type 83 is going to be able to do both the ASW and the air defense role. Hence, it's an 80.
Look.
But it's supposed to be designed around both. So it's going to be large
isn't that
enough.
what Bristol did? I mean, isn't it the
yes,
Type 81?
Yeah, 82. Yeah, that's Bristol. That's
82.
conventional. The tribal class before that were the Type 81s. They were global presence frigates, sort of thing, able to do both rows. The joy about the AE3s is they are going to basically be a Type 26 frigate combined with whatever the Type 45 mashed into one hull. And I sat there and went, so you're going to have the full rafted machinery and all the cost of doing that and making the hull really quiet? Yes. And you're going to have the full cost of having in all the power and the space and breadth you need for stability for air defense operations? Yes. You're basically going to make the most expensive escort you can build. Let's be honest, this is going to have... That's the other point of doing a frigate and a destroyer. It allows you to go, right then, we don't need to make it 100%... We don't need to make it 100% solution for the air defense role, as well as the ASW role. Because the moment you're trying to do that, you're trying to make a perfect ship. And it's not going to be. It's just not going to be.
Can I throw this out here? Because I have this question, and I want to throw it off at the two of you, because I want to know if I'm wrong or right on this, and you two probably have the best opinion on this. To me, I mean, if you look at who's building ships right now, it's China, Japan, and Korea. They seem to be able to put platforms out there fairly quickly, adaptive. I mean, they can basically pump them out. And to me, that's a combination of their ability to build Navy ships, but also commercial ships. And what really hurts United States, Australia, Great Britain, Europe in general is we don't do the commercial side anymore. We don't have that shipbuilding base anymore. And so what we're doing is building very unique platforms that are so unique that it's the entire focus of an industry to build a Type 26 or a Type 31 or what's going to be the Type 83, or for us, it's going to be Constellation. Entire shipyards are waiting on, hang on these orders, because that's their very existence. Whereas in Japan, Korea, and China, this is, over in that empty dry dock, we're going to build a destroyer, or over here we're going to build an amphibious vessel, and we're able to kind of fit that in and everything. I don't know if I'm wrong or right.
I would say it is partially there. That is a big factor into it, because it does give you a broader industry and infrastructure to draw from. So it does reduce the cost, and it does also mean that there's a lot of commercial reality. So the yards don't really want to hang around drawing out the defense projects, because they've got other things to go and build, which are going to make them even more profit. So, they're going to do that. But I'd also say, if you look at all those countries, when they announce they're procuring a ship, they define what its role is going to be. And they don't stick around going, oh, let's add in this and this and this. No, it's that role.
It's true. They don't change them.
They don't. You look at the Megamis. I love the Megamis. I'm worried about the Australians buying them, because the Japanese have literally built the Megamis as an ASW frigate, light frigate. That is it. That is what the Megami class is. ASW light frigate. They're built. I can already hear, and I have seen some articles already coming out from Australia, and I don't want to cause poor Jamie's blood pressure to go through the roof, which are talking about what other functions these ships could have built into them. And by the way, that's going to cost money. If you start making changes, it's going to cost money.
And the ongoing trickle-down effect, the whole domino effect, yeah. But look, I mean, I think it's a bit more fundamental than that. I think it's collective knowledge. So, Japan, Korea, and now China after 15, 20 years, they've now got, a collective knowledge in their welding workforce. They've got collective knowledge in their fitting and turning workforce. They've got collective knowledge in their architect workforce. They've got knowledge that can cross domains, and they've got communities that can talk to each other and therefore foster innovation and problem solving. They don't have the silos that the United States has. And this brings me to another point, which is the industries in Japan, South Korea, China are relatively new. They haven't built their silos yet. Whereas the United States is well and truly established. And I think the number one priority of most of those businesses is to protect their space, to protect their profit margins, and not the whole innovation problem solving thing, which is, becoming more of an issue because they're losing their collective knowledge of their welders, because they just had to lay them all off because they've lost one of the few contracts. They're losing their fitting and turning because they just had to lay them all off because the contract's fallen apart. And as you've already said, the architects are already long since gone. So I think it's a case of a stagnant, sorry to use such a brutal word, but it's a stagnant system that is so completely and utterly self-absorbed, with a young and energetic system which is actually willing to compromise, willing to admit, I don't know the answer to this, can you help? And happy to work at a level below the CEO executive lunch level. So that, when there's a problem with the welders, they don't go through the entire chain of command to get permission to talk to their next door neighbor welder. They just go down to, I don't know, local pub, local club, local fish and chip shop, local ramen store, and discuss it with them and take that solution back to their own workshop. That kind of thing, I think, would get you fired in the United States. It would get you fired in Australia, probably. So, look, I think it's very much at that sort of base level now. When you're so focused on defending your patch, you lose sight of actually what you're doing.
I think in Britain it wouldn't get you. The only reason it would get you fired is because the actual yards are so physically far apart. The company's own that it's a long way for you to actually be able to go and do that.
It'd be worse in the United States.
Admittedly, I know it's not as geographically as desperate as it is in America, but in the UK, the fact is the traffic build up on the roads acts its own distance multiplier. So that does mean most people going, I'm going to go to the pub. Am I going to go to the pub? No, that's far too much. That's about 4 hours drive. Considering the Americans look at the distance and go, why is that 4 hours drive? And we go, just don't ask.
No, I think you both hit a point. I think Jamie especially. I mean, because there was an interesting discussion with the former Secretary of the Navy, Del Toro, where he went to Korea, talked to welders, and he was amazed that welders in Korea, 100% of their time is welding. That's what they do. They don't do anything else but weld. Whereas American welders were maybe 50% welding, 20% paperwork, 10% doing, just a variety of different things. They really weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing. And then I think the other element we have here is one that is inherent in the US, British, and Australian is we look at the past history and the experiences. I mean, you can't do anything on a U.S. Navy designed ship without sitting there running into some things like, well, this is what saved the crew on Samuel B. Roberts. This is what was important here. So we got to build in this redundancy and this facet because we, number one priority is the crew, and we got to do which I'm 100% behind. I understand this, but there's a point where you can never save the ship 100% of the time. You can't save the crew 100% of the time. What point have we reached maximum redundancy where this is where I think they're so focused on autonomy right now, is because that's the way to save the crew. And again, it's like, okay, how many different fire main systems do I need, and loops and damage control? Because every time you design a ship, someone's bringing up Coventry, someone's bringing up, the Stark, and what we wind up doing is overbuilding ships, which is great. It's great to have that, but it really limits the ability to pump out ships in any sort of number.
Well, it's one of the things that comes up.
Perfection being the enemy of adequacy again.
Yeah, it's one of the things that you said. Of course, yes, the national, NAVC had to immediately go, well, it's not designed to our survivability stats, and you sit there go, so does that mean the French and Italians don't care about their crew and don't design with survivability stats? It's not designed to be survivable. And you sit there and go, well, no, of course it isn't. The French and Italians do make it as survivable as they can. They are just as cautious of their crew lives. I do sometimes, when I'm looking at some of the rules the Americans have and have for their Navy and some of the issues they have, let's just say, the boat handling crew is the example I tend to give. There are modern systems which allow you to basically take a boat on and off with one person watching the system. The Americans actually have some of them on the Zumwalts and a few other boats, a few of their ships. They still have the full boat crew have to show up. Boat crew and boat watch team have to be there, and they say it's for safety, and I can understand it. It is safer to have everyone already waiting there to pull the ship in if you need to, and pull the boat up if you need to manually. But it's also, you think about that, that's extra crew you're carrying who have to be there rather than doing other jobs on your ship and other things at the same time, and you don't need them to be doing that. You don't need them to be doing that. That's what the modern system is. And it does seem to be part of me, I sometimes when I'm hearing the stuff talked about, especially the fact that most of the other NATO nations have automated a good deal of their damage control systems to an extent. They're firefighting and some. They have automated them to extent to assist the crew to make it as easy. They call it technical crew assistance damage control. And when you bring this up to the U.S. Navy, there's almost, I've experienced when I talk to them, almost a vitriol reaction against it. And you sit there and go, why? I know it's not the best system. I know the crew system is the best, but surely a combination of crew and these systems is better than just relying on the crew. But there is almost again, I use the word vitriol reaction against it. There's a visceral reaction. They're just going, no. And I don't understand it. So, to be honest.
It's a conservatism. They resist change in many ways. Jamie, I don't mean to cut you off. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I was simply saying that I'm afraid I'm out of time, and I'm going to have to leave you here. So please continue if you wish, and good to be chatting with you again.
I'll see what happens to Drac. He's wandering around somewhere.
Okay.
I got to cut off in a few minutes myself too. Jamie, it's good seeing you.
It's good to see you. Thanks for being here, Jerry. I don't know. It's always fun trying to organise these Bilgepumps things.
I know. It's hard across continents to do it, so I appreciate it. And I'm sorry. I apologize for the other day. That was my fault.
No, don't worry. But anyway, the one thing I did want to ask you about before we we finish, and maybe we'll end up recording a second part and put them together into one video and all that sort of thing, is, for me, I'm hoping that all these things start to become a national debate. Because what I have noticed is that a lot of the discussion has started to percolate outside of our circles, outside of defence Twitter, outside of the defence publications, into the more irregular, everyday media, into the wider debate. And I'm hoping, and I know this is probably a fruitless hope, I'm hoping it starts a national discussion, because I think that's what you need if you're going to fix things. You need an actual national discussion where people actually get involved, rather than it being swept on the rug and just carrying on. Because for so many years, people have thought it's the wars of choice doctrine, but also the idea of it's not going to happen to us again. We're not going to find ourselves in a fight. We're not going to find ourselves. And realistically, the threats haven't gone away. They're just easier to ignore because there's so many other things going on in our lives.
Well, I think when you screw up things enough times, you get attention, and sometimes arguably successes aren't noticed because they're successes, and you take it for granted. And this is the thing I talk about with logistics all the time with militaries: is they build on the success of their logistics and they don't think about it, and then all of a sudden it's not there, and then until they have a logistics failure, that's what triggers them into action. In some ways, I think you have a shipbuilding failure. You have to have this failure, and I stem this back in the United States back to the 1980s when the U.S. made this conscious decision to allocate the 600 ship Navy entirely into private yards, close down the public yards, or transition the public yards over to repair facilities. Then, with the success of the Cold War, we go from 600 ships to 300 ships. We phase out a batch of the public yards even more. And, all we're building commercially is very few ships to kind of meet the coastal requirement of the United States. And, and then the shipbuilding programs we have, which are these big, huge leaps, big, kind of revolutionary jumps here, don't quite land well. I mean, Zumwalt doesn't land well. Ford doesn't land well. LCS doesn't land well.
Well, the annoying thing about the Zumwalts is the ship itself, the actual hull, the engines, the architecture, that's good. It was the Christmas tree projects they added onto it that failed.
Which the Navy did a failure of really promoting, in my way. It's like, okay, if the gun fails, then we could do something else with this hull. But this hull is needed. We need to build 32 of them. Yeah. Because there's a lot we can do with this platform beyond the 155 millimeter gun, which isn't working.
Yeah, and that is still the most annoying thing for me in US production, that Zumwalt story, because you have a very good ship, very good hull, and then people tell me, oh, it's a failed program. I go, it's not. It's the systems they tacked onto it that failed. The ship itself, everything else worked. You could have just changed the systems.
Well, and when you have And when you have a shipyard that's geared up to build 2 berks a year, and you tell it, okay, you're going to start building 2 Zumwalts a year,
yeah,
destroy everything that you use for the berks and start gearing up for Zumwalts, and then, oh, by the way, we're just going to build 3. And oh, by the way, restart the restart the berk line. It's not like you throw a switch. It's not like
no,
you throw a switch and berks start popping out of the end of the dock. It's you've got and you know I've heard so many people criticize Bath for this, and it's like you can't destroy a workforce because that's what they did. They destroyed the workforce because so many people left, and now it's hard to resurrect that back up, and that creates the problem. And again, I come back to this issue that there's no other place for these shipyard workers to go because there's no commercial side to go to. The building side on the government side is so kind of up and down that they take their welding skills and go work in construction or something else, you know, that pays steady.
Well, let's be honest, it's not just pays steady. Working on the oil rigs, etc., pays a lot more than working. Yeah, it's just, I just find
as I said, Alex, as I said before, I think I have the solution for the U.S. Constellation problem, and I think we should adopt what we're doing right now in the Caribbean and just fast rope onto foreign frigates and take them over, and we'll just seize them and take them for our own. That seems to be the process, which may work and produce hulls.
Please don't do it. In the nicest way. Please don't do it as the Royal Navy. We've only got 7 Type 23s currently functioning. And I'm still annoyed, and I know a fair number of people are still annoyed. The fact that the Duke of Lancaster, the Duke of Lancaster's HMS Lancaster was not brought back to the UK for a ceremony, which meant that the Duke of Lancaster couldn't attend it. And of course, the Duke of Lancaster is the king.
I can't believe they decommissioned it overseas. It was amazing.
It's almost like they didn't want to have a ceremony where a monarch could be at, which would make a load of headline news if the ship being decommissioned.
Yep. Alex, it's been a pleasure. I got to run.
Take care.
It's always a pleasure. It's great to see you and Jamie back up. I hate to miss Drac, but we will get back together soon.
We will do. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. So I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I know it was a lot of fun. Poor Drac, he'd suggested a time, and I know this will keep being discussed in this video, he suggested a time, and then he was the one who couldn't make it, and it just... We recorded because it was getting close to the point of release date, so we had to get the recordings done. We couldn't keep scheduling it further on and further on. Anyway, to me and Drac chatting away, and... Well, this is a kind of always an easier one for me and Drac to organise, us talking to each other, because we talk to each other quite often. And we literally do, how do I put this bluntly, WhatsApp each other occasionally with a question mark going, "You free?" And then the chat starts. And then people complain we are chatting too much and are late for them. But yeah, so... After this is myself and Drac. Hello, Drac. Hello, everyone. Now, you'll have seen part one of this video, and it's going to be a combined video, but it is a two-parter, because as is normal with Shipshape crew and Bilgepumps crew, we are very busy, and sometimes the easiest way to organise us actually being together is to abduct us all to Japan. That really does work, or Australia. But yeah, poor Drac was busy when we finally did. It was the second attempt to record it. And Drac was busy, and even though he'd suggested a time, and then he was busy. So we recorded a bit, and we thought, well, we'll do a follow-on section, which is him and me, talking about why can't we seem to procure frigates anymore? Why do these issues keep popping up? Why? And it's something you and I talk about a lot. When we're travelling, we talk about these various programs, but it's we haven't put it on camera of why it's not happening.
Yeah, it's... I mean, it's one of those slightly ironic things, isn't it? Because when they first announced this program years back when Bilgepumps was running fairly regularly, then we were quite positive on the idea because, at least at the time, it seemed to make a lot of sense. You know, take an off-the-shelf design which should, in theory, be replicable pretty easily.
Yes.
And pump out a bunch of holes that the US kind of rather badly needs. And then everything went quiet for a bit, and then things started to go wrong, and things started to go even further wrong, and then eventually now it's gone to the point where they are going, actually, no, we're not doing it anymore.
And it's not the same thing as happened with Zumwalt, where the Zumwalt was, as I often describe it, as all the bits which were added onto the Zumwalt failed, but the actual ship was good. So if they'd just taken the ship and stuck Mark 41 VLS and 5-inch guns on the front to replace the specialist guns which they were going to put in there, and started churning them out in almost a Burkeized version of command and control system, they'd have been fine. They would have been a very good destroyer. But this seems to have had more going wrong. It's no longer... Well, basically, to my mind, and I'd love to get your position on this, is they basically went, "Ooh, this is the FREMM. It's a lovely off-the-shelf design. But now we want to change that bit. And once you change that bit, well, now we have to change that bit. 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 Now we have to change that bit." And the trouble is, when they were procuring it, they said the changes were going to be cosmetic. And as you and I both know with ship design, changes very quickly stop being cosmetic once you get past a certain point of what you want to change. And the big thing they seem to want to change and obsess with, of course, is US manning regulations, manning rules, and their damage control. And the damage control for the Americans is a fun one, because sometimes honestly, when you're talking about this, you get into a scenario where you sound like you're arguing against damage control and proper damage control. But I'd argue it's against sort of the US Navy has very much, in the US, especially in their ship procurement sides, has very much this idea that damage control has to be done by the crew completely. And almost any assistance, any damage control assistance aids and those sort of things you put into most other Navy ships is almost a bad thing. And I can understand the idea of going, well, what happens if that fails? Well, then you've got even more problems. But the point is, it's to assist the crew. And there's all sorts of other things which sort of fit into that sort of mindset where you have, I would say, very much a US Navy way. And it was something we did worry about when they first were talking about the FREMM was, well, are they going to accept this and go, okay, this is going to cause a change in the US Navy way, or are they going to try and change this to the US Navy way? Does that make sense outside my head, or was that just in my head?
I think one of the biggest problems that they ended up having was that I think they tried to make it do too much, and I think this comes back around to what you said at the beginning about why can't people order frigates anymore. And I think it's that they keep losing sight of what a frigate is.
Yes,
which is given that the last two major procurement programs for the US Navy in terms of surface combatants have been the LCS and the Zumwalt. Perhaps in hindsight, it's not quite so surprising, but in pure practical terms, you'd think of all the people who wouldn't lose sight of what a frigate is, it would be the US, because you can understand to a certain extent the monstrous growth of the T-26 variant for Australia.
Yes.
Because they're trying to make it their general purpose surface combatant.
While still getting the same size as the Royal Navy, which has never made sense from going for the Canadian size version.
It's someone who does that makes sense. And even to a certain extent, given that we're talking about something that is ultimately based on the FREMM, some of the issues that the French and the Italians had with their initial implementation of FREMM made sense, because you've got anti-sub variants and anti-air variants, and the French have a kind of a land attack variant as well, to a certain degree.
Yeah.
And so you've got multiple different variants on the same basic hull, but even then, they they at least had a sort of a common, like, okay, if we're going to put this system here, this system has to go. And they understood that, the anti-air variant isn't going to have anti-submarine capabilities, or, as it's not going to have the kind of anti-sub capabilities you expect of an anti-sub frigate compared to the actual anti-sub variants. And equally, the anti-sub variant isn't going to be able to defend itself as well as the anti-air variant. But with the US, they've got, infinite Burks almost. They've got, a nice, big, chunky anti-aircraft warfare destroyer, even if it's beginning to get a little bit overstuffed with the Flight 3s. So at that point, you'd think, hang on, you should really understand that is the anti-air ship. This is the anti-sub ship. You've done this before with the OHPs. You don't need to make it a mini Aegis ship. And then they go and make it a mini Aegis ship. And not even so many. I think that the kind of the core problem is they've tried to put far too much into the capability. Because if you look at the French and the Italian versions of the FREMM, yes, there is a 32 cell system with the silver launchers, and without getting into like the fine differences between the various iterations of silver versus Mark 41. But yes, there is a 32 cell system, but that is specifically for the anti-aircraft warfare variant, which doesn't do sub-hunting except as a backup.
Yeah.
Whereas with the Constellation, they've tried to have 32 Mark 41s and 16 canister-launched surface-to-surface missiles and RAM CIWS and the anti-sub system. And you're suddenly going, yeah, that's not how this frigate works. If you were going to do that, you'd need another, 2,000 to 1,500 tons, which is ironically about as much as it ended up going overweight by. So, even if they hadn't changed lots of other internal bits, it was probably doomed just on that basis, kind of like the Sims class in the 1930s, where they're like, we're going to take a hull that's about the same size as our normal destroyers, but we're going to put ridiculous armament on it. And then they're surprised when the thing has the stability of a wet blancmange.
I've had an interesting comment about this recently, because I did a video on my own channel which was talking about sort of some things. And I put in, why can't we procure we can't procure third rate, so everything has to be first rate. And the person before, well, if they get killed and you tell them they're in if your people get killed and they're in a third rate, then the people aren't going to understand. And you sit there and go, you're completely misunderstanding what the difference is between a third rate and a first rate ship. The people hear third rate and they think it's going to be bad or terrible systems, and you're just putting in the cheap and nasty stuff. The third rate ship wasn't a cheap and nasty ship, but it was a ship which was basically, okay, first rate is your god tier. Third rate is it can do everything general purpose.
Yeah. It's the standard line of battleship. I mean, well, put it in a World War II context. Your third rate is your 35,000 ton treaty ship. Your first rate is your 45,000 ton Iowa Vanguard type vessel.
Yeah.
The existence of one does not obviate the existence of the other.
No, and it's the trouble is these days now it seems it's got to be everything's got to be first rate and everything's got to be able to do everything. Otherwise, we can't have it, because then it's lesser and we're going to look bad. And you sit there and go, no, it's the sensible option to go with. If you consider again, go back to FREMM, it's got roughly 3 variants, and they were basically trying to make, we're going to make one variant that rules them all.
With everything.
Yeah.
And I think one of the other things that I kept seeing various people online commenting or whining about, depending on exactly what tone they were taking, was a lot of people going on and on about, the ship doesn't meet NAVSEA standards.
Yes.
And I'm sitting there going, right, item the first, if the ship was so badly compromised structurally that it completely fails NAVSEA standards, why on earth did you let it win the competition in the first place? Secondly, if it doesn't actually violate NAVSEA standards that badly, but maybe, obviously various nations will have slightly different, standards for how much pumping capacity you should have, where the bulkhead should be, all of that.
Yeah.
I mean, they're still NATO compliant ships. So yeah, maybe they're slightly off, but if they're slightly off, then at that point, I would seriously begin to ask, well, do you actually need to stick, doctrinally to whatever NAVSEA standard you've written as if it's gospel, especially bearing in mind that the last time you did a frigate was the OHPs, which were, they were laid down before you or I was even born. And we're not exactly young anymore.
Don't tell me that. I'm still a whippersnapper. I'm still a babe.
But the thing is, it's like people are, but it's the NAVSEA standard. But no, there isn't one golden NAVSEA standard to rule them all, because the NAVSEA design standard for an aircraft carrier or for a submarine or for a destroyer or for an LCS are all very different things, understandably, because you understand a carrier has to be built somewhat differently and hopefully a bit more durably than a 10,000-ish ton surface combatant. Mm-hmm. But the principle of different ship, different role, needs different standards is understood. So why then couldn't you go, okay, this is our surface combatant. It's not as big, it's not as bad, and it's not as nasty as a Burke. Therefore, we are going to adjust where we can our standards and say, yes, this is a somewhat less survivable platform. But guess what? It's not supposed to be sitting on the front line fighting 1,000,000,001 missiles. It's got self-defense capability. It's not a fleet defense ship. It's designed to go after the subs. And that way, all the actual fleet defense ships are kept alive because they're not getting torpedoed. Which is basically what everybody else who's built a frigate has and has destroyers has accepted.
Basically, Burke job. Deal with that threat air threat coming in and make sure the frigate is free to do its job.
Mm.
That's what you're doing. That's what you get the 2 for.
And the thing is, it's not even like the US Navy is unfamiliar with this. Because again, they built the OHPs. Look at the OHPs versus, the Tychos and the various other anti-aircraft warfare ships they had back then. They are not the same. Or you go back even further to obviously the time period we're more comfortable with. Look at the destroyer escorts, which are essentially the frigates, versus the full fleet destroyers, the Fletchers, the Sumners, and the Gearings. They are not the same. They are not built to be the same, to have the same level of armor. They're not built to have the same level of survivability. And everyone understood that because they have very different roles.
Well, the thing is, this is the point that I was sort of thinking was that I tend to use this. I tend to use the 2F class as the sort of the finger points of this, but they should probably use the Sumners. The U.S. Navy talked like they were getting a Flower class, but seemed to have gone in with the idea they were getting a Fletcher. Now, the other thing you could say is sort of Sumner versus a Fletcher, because they were talking about getting an ASW platform that was off the shelf and cheap, and they seem to have gone, we want a general purpose kill everything platform. And that's the thing. A Fletcher is a very different cost bracket than a Sumner or a Flower class.
Yeah, they tried to turn a frigate into a mini Burke.
Yes.
And shockingly, that doesn't actually work, which is a bit of a shame because obviously the other thing is that, as we said, they weren't prepared to compromise on whatever arbitrary standard they've set beforehand. And as a result, they've then ended up, as you said, they've made a change to, at which point they've gone, oh yeah, but that compromises that. So therefore we now need to change this, and then we now need to change this. And this is not exactly an issue that hasn't happened before in warship design until you made all these little incremental changes that are only adding a few tons here, a few dozen tons there, and suddenly you're 1,000 tons plus overweight, and the whole thing is unworkable and stupidly expensive because they've probably spent now more time revising the existing design than they could have spent just making one from scratch.
And there's the interesting thing which came through from Sal when I was discussing this with him, that NAVSEA command now exists almost entirely in the shipyards. They've dispersed their people around the shipyard, so they're not in a central place. They're actually all in the shipyard justifying themselves and existing in shipyards. But shipyards themselves don't employ their own naval architects anymore. They employ outside consulting firms, which come in. So,
who are incentivized to find issues and charge for corrections.
They get called in to get charged. So instead of having people, you both don't have your own institutional memory in the US Navy anymore because they've got rid of their own naval architects, broadly speaking, their people. And you've got no naval architects who actually belong to the shipyard. So everyone's fighting this out, and there's no one sitting there going, but that doesn't work. And there's no naval architect in the shipyard to argue with the changes and go, because the NAVSEA employees, apparently, this is I was listening to Sal this, and I was mentally going through, because I used the story of Admiral Henderson, who used to visit the shipyards on a Sunday, and would go around out of uniform, wander around there, and the directors would only realise he'd shown up when they get a call from the gate going, an admiral's just let himself in. Oh, great, he's come to look at the ships. But the idea of someone actually coming and staring over your shoulder while you're working and going, no, I don't want it that way, it's got to be this way, that's going to add millions to the price tag. Because you got hundreds of people doing that.
Especially when, as you and I both know, having worked in kind of the office job engineering sector at various points, an awful lot of the time, the senior people who come down and say, I want this, that, and the other, actually genuinely don't know what the heck they're talking about. So you end up going, yes, sir, no, sir, 3 bags full, sir, I've made that change, sir, while carefully keeping a save of whatever file or design you were working on the minute they showed up. You give them their design changes, and then you immediately revert to your previous save and keep working because you know that's never going to work. And when you're new in the role, you make all the changes and you submit it, and then everybody else goes, "That's terrible. Why on earth did you do that?" At which point the manager goes, "Oh no, I never said to do that." And then you have to go back and redo all your work. And then when you're smart, you're just like, actually, no, okay, yeah, that didn't work. What about this one? Which is the one you designed in the first place.
Well, it's like you and I. This is the fun conversation you and I have had over the years. Was as I've said before, is occasionally as the historian in the room, and when I've had to correct the maths of people, and I've been going, I should not be the one correcting the maths, but I will do. If I'm the only one here who can do this, I will correct the maths. But that happens more often than not because someone has tried to bend over backwards to appease a politician or make themselves look good in front of some sort of politician, and you're going, no, it doesn't work. It doesn't work.
And I think also that this is a case of right hand not knowing what the left hand is doing. When you look at the spec of the FREMM.
Yeah.
And you look at the final spec of the Constellation, and then you look at the competitors in the original Constellation design program. And I was like, okay, fine, forget the LCSs; they're never going to work. And with the best will in the world,
people keep telling me I'm wrong about the Freedom Class frigate. That would work. That's apparently going to work. The fact they've kept the aluminium hull and all the other things. No, the Freedom Class would work as a frigate.
Here I come with my 1911. You have no hull on. That is literally the level of firepower you need to get through a Freedom Class. I
look at the comments going out and I just go, no, you're listening to the marketing hype. They haven't changed the hull design. They've just extended it. It's still aluminium. It's still got the weird framing. It's still going to be a nightmare. Don't expand it up to a frigate.
Mind you, imagine all the internal space they'll have for gyms when they cut out 2/3 of the machinery space, so they have to go at a sensible speed instead of powerboat speeds.
That's the market. It would be the high-speed frigate.
Oh dear, yeah. Put hydrofoils on it or something. But no, the Miko, honestly, that was pretty much going to be out of the running from the start because it was far too small.
Yes.
And that leaves you with the FREMM, which obviously eventually won. A modification of the US Coast Guard cutter, which I know Sal is quite fond of.
I think that's probably the one where they're going to go for. I honestly
they're probably going to be forced to go into it. I'm a little bit hesitant myself, mostly just on the basis of the thing being a little bit undersized compared to if this is the level of capability they want for the Constellations, they're either going to have to curtail their dreams a lot, or they're going to have to massively expand the hull.
What I'm worried about is two things of that. One, it already does look like a mini Burke, so goodness knows what they'll end up doing to it. And two, they've actually shut down the production line at various stages because they didn't order the 11th and the 12th hull.
Yeah.
So it's not a hot production line. So that means they're going to have to restart it. And that means a lot of people, welders, etc., are probably going to go work on oil fields. And that means you're going to be facing all sorts of issues.
But yeah, as I say, like when you're looking at that leaves you with the other contender, which was the Álvaro de Bazán, the Spanish frigate.
Ah, yes.
F100. And I'm looking at that and going...
What the Australians call a destroyer.
Yeah, I'm looking at that going, okay, it's marginally smaller than a FREMM, but not by a huge amount.
No.
But it has all the capabilities pretty much that the final Constellation actually has ended up with. It's got a deck gun. It's actually got more VLS. It's got 48 cells instead of 32. Yeah. It's already got spy radar, admittedly older spy radar. But hey, if your superstructure is designed for spy, you can just replace it with newer spy rather than having to redesign the entire superstructure. It's got the deck-mounted canister launchers. Okay, it's a little bit light on the anti-sub stuff, understandably, because that's not really what the Spanish designed it for. But apart from being a little bit light on the anti-sub stuff and having somewhat shorter range, it pretty much already meets the Constellation spec. And given that it's got a third more missiles than apparently even the US wants on its Constellation, there's scope to actually reduce the F100 style armament in order to fit more other systems like towed arrays and so forth to boost up. And as I say, you don't need to redo the superstructure. In theory, with it being designed to take US weapons, it should be a bit closer to NAVC standards in the first place. And it's like, if this is what you wanted, if you wanted basically a mini anti-aircraft warfare ship that also happened to be good at hunting submarines, you should have chosen the F100 in the first place. The fact that you chose the FREMM, that to me says that somebody looked at it and went, but the FREMM goes further, and Pacific does need range, and then they didn't really think any further beyond that, or possibly they didn't even know what they wanted from it other than cheaper and smaller than Burke.
I think that's the problem. I think one of the problems I see in a lot of modern construction, especially navies, but in wider amongst the wider government, is that they come up with the name of what they want. They come up with the catchphrase for what they want and the very nice quips that they put on Twitter and things. But they don't actually work out what they want until they're a long way down the production line process, and that's when they realise they aren't getting what they wanted. And that's what leads to a lot of the issues. But also, I think the trouble is, what the US Navy needed is an ASW ship. What the US Navy wants, or rather what Sea Command wants, I'm not sure if it is an ASW ship. I don't really think that's what they're looking for. I think they are looking for something else.
Or they've, because they haven't actually run a frigate for so long, they've got locked into a mindset of surface combatant equals Burke. Every other surface combatant must be Burke scaled on a Xerox to whatever displacement.
That is, I think, potentially the really big trouble that we're dealing with for this scenario. I think, realistically, I do wonder if one of the issues for the Constellation Class is that they are not a Burke, and they have, in many ways, been looking at them and going, well, no, you have to fit the Burke paradigm. And they don't.
At which point you might as well have just gone, how about we just make an ASW version of the Burke? That probably would have been simpler and cheaper than this.
Well, there was that thing where, which I think I talked about with you on Bilgepumps a while back. I'm not sure if it ever made it into an actual video, where the idea was, why didn't they just make the general purpose version of the Zumwalt as the new destroyer, and just make it general purpose, and take the bits out and put Mark 41 VLS and 500 guns, and turn the Burke into the ASW ship.
Mm.
And that
And
would
of course,
be, they could have
you've got
kept
the
the
other
whole
thing, of
production
course,
lines going, and it would be fine.
there was the whole thing with the Constellation program of it has to be a design that's already in service, because although this is going to sound very British, in terms of displacement and payload and survivability and all the other stuff that they wanted, the T-26 basically ticks all the boxes plus more. The
Yes.
only difference was that when they selected it, the T-26 hadn't yet entered service. But then, given that this whole thing,
Well,
given how long it's taken them to build the blasted thing, I mean, I think we're going to get the first T-26s in service before Constellation.
Well, that's the joke, really, because honestly, if you look at the Canadian version of the T-26, the River class, they fit the Constellation, what the Constellation requirements have moved to almost to a T. In fact, I'd say the Canadian one are it but better, because what the Canadians were looking for was a heavy frigate which can do pretty much everything.
Yeah. That's the bell. Ish has just arrived.
Okay.
Can we, if you pause the...
Realistically, though, it's to me, the Constellation class and the whole FREMM decision has, to an extent, come about due to the politics involved in it, I think, as well. I think, as you and I both know, there's always a lot of politics involved in these procurement decisions. But I think, to a large extent at the moment, the politics is driving far more than just the nitty-gritty. The example I give is that I was involved in a discussion a few weeks back, and it was over a future program. And it was things like the numbers of toilets on the ship had reached ministerial level, with the minister wanting to weigh in on it. And you sort of go, why? And apparently the toilets, they couldn't understand why they had so many on the mess deck level. And of course it's for when they're entertaining, so that the people don't have to go elsewhere in the ship, and it's far more secure. You have those toilets there, and you just tell them, oh yeah, they're the toilets for the event. Their toilets are just there. You don't want people wandering through your ship. But that meant you have a whole load of toilets in that airspace, and then you need other toilets elsewhere, and it's a case of, yeah, you need more toilets on a ship. This isn't something which ministers should be getting involved in.
No. And I mean, one of the other things was, of course, last year there was this whole thing about, it's all being delayed because there's backlogs in the shipyard. We don't have enough skilled people. And that kind of that struck me as, again, something we discussed, I think, on one of the last episodes of Bilgepumps. You remember however many Navy secretaries ago it was, I think probably 2 or 3 at this point.
Yeah.
The one that I absolutely laid into, because he was like, well, we'd like to build, I think it was 3 or 4 Berks a year. And he's like, but the industry can only build 1 or 2 less.
Oh, yes.
And therefore we have to adjust our expectations to industry. And I was sitting there going, no.
Oh,
when
God,
it comes to
yeah.
national defense, industry adapts to national requirements. And if they can't adapt to national requirements, you build a new industry, or you find other people who will do it. It's not a case of, the private industrial complex only wants to do this and will not do anything more. It's like, that's not how national defense works.
They keep putting the cart before the horse, and it's not the way you're supposed to. You need this, and also I find it really weird, because you're going to tell me that if you turn around to a company and go, I want you to be building me 4 ships a year, and I'm going to guarantee this because I'm going to order 20 ships get go now. You don't tell me that any company is going to turn around and go, no, I won't take that. Or is it that you want 4 ships a year? I would like to order 4 ships. I would like to have 4 ships a year, but I only want to order them in batches of 4, so I'm going to give you no guarantee. And then the industry is probably going to look and go, so we ramp up to be able to build 4 ships, and then you order 2.
Yeah, I think that this is kind of, obviously last year the same design problems which have led to this being cancelled will have been there at that point.
Yeah.
But if they had been resolvable, or if they had resolved them in some way, shape, or form, or if they just hadn't existed in any other timeline, this separate delay being because we don't have enough capacity or enough workers in the shipyards, that only really applies as an excuse in something like late World War II Britain, where you physically have run out of people. Whereas in peacetime 2024, 2025 USA, those workers exist.
Yeah.
It's more about, are you prepared to pay what you need to attract the requisite numbers and skills of workers? And then the whole thing loops back around to, are you taking your national defense seriously? Because this is, was supposed to be a program to very quickly bolster US Navy fleet numbers in a role that they were missing. At which point, if you're essentially doing your not quite wartime emergency flotilla, but close to, that's when you go, okay, yeah, if we have to throw a few more million at the work contracts to boost people's salaries by 20% so that we'll attract enough people to actually build the ships that we need, that's, it's penny wise and pound foolish to go, oh no, actually, on this multi-billion-dollar project, we're going to save a few million here and there by not paying the people what they're worth.
Also, as you and I both would tell people, is if you actually are building in bulk, you end up recouping that money. Because the cost of construction gets cheaper and cheaper each unit you build. You've already sunk all the costs of the research and development. Building the ship is actually the cheap part. This is the part which you and I like to talk to occasionally about the Type 45s, how they're fitted for, not with Mark 41 VLS. One of the reasons they are cancelled, they stop them, is because they're not general purpose enough. Okay, so what you could have done is just order the last 6 without the silver VLS system, but just stick Mark 41 VLS, and you end up with 6 general purpose destroyers that can also do air defense. You could have literally done that, and you could have built them, and those would have been the 6 cheapest ships. So making a change like that would have added pennies, because you've already paid for all the research and development. They've already got all the systems built into them. The next 6 ships, it's 6 billion, including research and development, to build the first 6. To build the next 6, it's probably about 1.8 billion. If you make the decision to put in Mark 41 VLS instead of silver for them, okay, maybe that changes things a bit. So let's say that makes them a whopping 350 million per unit. So, I don't know, that turns them into... What does that? 350 million a unit times 6 equals what? 2.1 billion?
Something like that.
An extra for the next extra 6. So great, I've got 12 destroyers for 8.1 billion. That's a far better deal than 6 for 6, isn't it?
And I mean, one of the other, it's sort of, I guess, morbidly amusing, is that in the press release that cancels this, they're saying, we need to basically, they're saying we need to build more ships faster. And you're sort of sitting there going, that's why you were building the Constellations.
And it's also,
the whole point was to build more ships faster than you could build Berks, and now you're cancelling the more ships and faster program for another more ships and faster program.
And you're cutting at the point at which they're starting to churn out ships. The ships are starting to go through.
I mean, there are still a lot of issues. Obviously, the design still isn't finalized. So, the thing is, as much as we're being very negative about the whole process, I think honestly this was probably the right decision, given what an absolute palaver the program has become, but it should never have gotten to this point.
I think people might misunderstand. They might think we're saying that you shouldn't be cancelling this program at this point. No. What we're saying is, how the frigate did you get here in the first frigating place? Why did you get it so bad?
I mean, because assuming, we always have to assume some things, of course, but assuming that what they're saying in the press release for the reasons of cancellation and so forth is accurate, that does have the rather disturbing implication that they think launching a brand new program and presumably making either a brand new design from scratch or modifying another existing design to a certain extent, and then building that, will be faster than sorting out the ongoing issues with the current hull design. Although, of course, what then you're going to do with a pair of ships that have no wider, outside of basic systems, but that, as wholes have no wider compatibility with the rest of the fleet. Who knows? I mean, they might make decent test ships, I guess. You could use them as like the US used to use the Mississippi as a test bed, dedicated test bed vessel to run around launching things with a good amount of hull life in it. But what you're going to do with 2 essentially one-offs?
I think
ultimately you have to ask yourself is, are they going to be like the Zumwalts, which are going to be have been found a use for, but it's not really a justification for them existing in that sort of way? Or are they going to be sold to allies as quickly as possible? In which case, there are quite a few allies for whom having 2 such frigates would be quite useful ships.
Yeah, well, to be honest, selling off a short run, well, what the US Navy counts as a short run production of ships to an ally isn't unheard of.
No.
Of course, for added hilarity, they might end up being the dedicated escorts for the Zumwalts. This little collection of curtailed programs is like the short bus flotilla made up of the Zumwalts, 2 Constellations, and whichever LCSs haven't chewed up their own gearing this year.
Oh, good lord! Yeah, I still can't believe the amount of people who keep telling me that the LCS is actually a great design, and I'm sitting there going, no, it just isn't.
But had the potential to be if they didn't want them to go at 40 knots, but cut out half the machinery and reuse that space and wait for something else, and you might have had a half decent design. But
the Freedom class, the idea of it was a frigate, and this is the last version I've read, which I actually read this morning as its frigate proposal, doubled its weight and reduced its top speed to 36 knots, but still kept the aluminium hull. That doesn't sound like a good recipe for a good frigate. That just doesn't sound like a recipe for a good frigate.
If that implies they're keeping the original machinery spec, at which point, if you given the existing hull issues those things had, doubling the weight and then slamming them through the water at 36 knots seems like a very good way of making ships that won't last 5 years.
Well, this is the point. I get calls from people going, no, they're better than that, and I go, okay, I know there's about 6 different versions of this design running around, at least 4 of them from the company itself, which worries me immediately. But on top of that, there is the very real reality that I'm not sure anyone knows what that design is going to be, and what it would actually finally be, even the people who are designing it under those circumstances. The national security cutter seems to be the sensible option that they're going with, which, let's be honest, it's the problem I'm worried. The thing that worries me about that is 2 things. One, to get it, they've cut the Coast Guard production line short, and let's be honest, the Coast Guard do need a national security cutters. They were supposed to be getting their new offshore security cutter or whatever the thing is, but it's also, that program's also running into a nightmare. The only program which was actually running well and delivering on time, on budget, and doing itself centrally was the National Security Cutter program. And I do worry they've now cut the last 2 versions of that for the Coast Guard to try and cobble together a frigate program for the US Navy. And I don't think it's... I think it's got potential, but I'm honestly worried what NAVC will get up to with it. I'm honestly worried. Because... love them or hate them, they have ideas. They have lots of ideas.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find the... this is the thing, under the patrol frigate designs, I'm just looking at because obviously, if they are going to go with the Coast Guard cutter respect as a frigate, I'm just looking up the old designs that they submitted for the original competition, and I'm looping back to the same thing I said earlier on, which is I can see them turning out a decent frigate from it, sort of a decent small to medium frigate. However, it doesn't look like the concept increase the displacement that much compared to the Legend class. And if it's not increased the displacement that much, and it's not going to increase the size that much, if you couldn't fit what they wanted on a 7,000 plus ton Constellation, you sure as heck are not fitting that capability on something that's 2,500 tons less, which means that somebody somewhere is going to have to accept the fact that the vision that they had in the first place was a complete pie in the sky. Which, I mean, to be fair, that we've kind of figured that out for ourselves. But trying to see what they're going to do with that is going to be interesting.
Well, I suppose their thing is they're going what was designed for but not with additional weapons and sensors. So it can, so it's designed for the things. But it is
but
also...
You've got a limited size hull. You physically can't get 32 cells on there if you're also going to have a deck gun and your box launchers for surface missiles and your helicopter and your
I think
etc.
Looking at the design, if I remember correctly, there is a space for 16 cells in the centre.
Well, it's supposed to, I think, according to one of these articles, it's supposed to have had a 12-cell Mark 56, which fires the Evolved Sea Sparrow. I can absolutely guarantee you the first thing somebody's going to try and do is make that at least a 12-cell Mark 41, which is going to be more weight.
Which is going to be deeper also in the hull, which is going to have to move the hull things around. Oh, good lord. Yeah,
I mean, the thing is, if someone can accept that you're building a primarily anti-submarine platform with some self-defense capability and not a Burke that's been scaled down by 2,000 to 3,000 tons, it could definitely work, but you're ultimately still going to be left with a somewhat less capable platform than you would have done if you'd just put Mark 41s instead of silver and call it a day with the original design that you had your competition for years and years and years ago.
Yeah, let's see. So currently, the person who we're really looking at this for the US Navy is Vice Admiral James P. Downey, who's the Admiral in charge of NAVSEA Systems Command. That's the person who's ultimately responsible for this. And let's consider his previous experience. He's been Deputy Commander for Surface Warfare at NAVSEA Systems Command, Program Executive Officer for the Aircraft Carriers, and now is Commander of NAVSEA Systems Command. Yeah, I could be wrong. He could turn out to be excellent. But there is something about him which makes me think that he's not going to be the type of guy. Looking at his pictures and reading his bio, there's something about him which I'm looking at which is just making me think he's not going to be the type of person who's going to go, "No, sir, this is a frigate. It can't have that in it." He looks... I hate to say this about people because it could be completely wrong, but he just looks too nice.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm sorry to say this, but let's think about the people who've run successful programs in the past, who have run successful defense procurement programs. All of them were able to, sometimes politely, but very appropriately, tell people to foxtrot Oscar.
I mean, the other thing that I can see potentially being a problem, unless again they're willing to take a fairly big capability cut, is that as far as I'm aware, the original ESSM VLS system, which they were proposing in the initial competition, that isn't compatible with ASRock, and therefore is unlikely to be compatible with any future ASRock replacement system. Which, yeah, if you're not, I mean, okay, if you're using ASRock, some things have probably gone slightly wrong, but that's the whole purpose of an anti-submarine frigate, for when submarines have made things go slightly wrong. So
yes, one of the other things for ASRock is my helicopter has run out of torpedoes and I don't want to lose locks, so I'm going to pop some torpedoes in there now.
Yeah, and my concern at that point is, if they stick with the 12 cell, they're going to have to upgrade it to Mark 41 just so that they can fit some ASRock. But if they then stick with the 12 cell, and it's carrying ASROC, even if it's only carrying half a dozen ASROC, you have basically no self-defense capability at that point, which then means you're going to need at least a 2 dozen cell launcher, and suddenly we're back at the Constellation.
Well, the thing is, let's think about it. You could quad pack ESSM into the Enhanced Sea Sparrow into the Mark 41. So you've got 6 cells, you can carry 24 of them, but you're only carrying 6 ASROC.
Yeah. And that's still
not that's not a lot of missiles. No. If you consider the whole thing of the Constellation carrying 32, I think about half of those were supposed to be ESSM, so they were going to carry 64. I think that was the sort of thing, and you sit there and go, no, this is not a good scenario.
But we shall have to see. I mean, who knows? Someone in the interim might have done something clever, like put a whole module in to expand the Legend class to something that can carry 24 VLS or something like that.
Although I have to say that, again, this is bringing me back to a rather fun comment I saw on my own channel the other day, which apparently the Mark 31, Type 31 frigates are only going to have 6 cells on them, 6 VLS cells.
The what?
Yeah, I know that's not the case at all. But
they don't even do VLS in units of 6.
No, they don't.
Packs of 8.
I know. I was just going. I don't know where to begin. One of the things I think, and this is something which you and I probably deal with quite a lot, is one of the problems I find about the modern debate about ships and modern procurement ships is it's so much less informed than the historical debate, and the amount of people, and you sit there and go, these people aren't lying. These people are sincerely have read somewhere it's this, and probably it's been in a newspaper article or something online, and they sincerely believe
that has conflated a bunch of stuff and decided that we're reintroducing the 32-pounder or something.
Yeah, and you sit there and go, and this is one of the problems I think with modern procurement is that the wider debate is so lacking information. That the politicians can get away with anything, and that they can make it sound like they're doing the right thing. And I get those debates, like we started off with, talking about the third rate versus the first rate, and the idea that a third rate is somehow I'm sending my people to die because I'm putting them into a third rate ship. I'm not. I'm basically going, right then, the third rate is a price point. Okay, when we start talking about first rate, second rate, third rates, fourth rate, fifth rate, sixth rates, and unrated ships, you're basically talking about price points of construction. First rate is, I'm prepared to blow the bank to get the most supreme vessel, everything I can. Third rate is, okay, I've got a budget. I need to build a certain number of these. They need to be as good as they can, but they need to be on this budget. It's sort of okay, so it's the volume argument. And you're usually putting in the same equipment you have in the first rate, but you're putting in less of it. That's usually the case. It's still a well-designed ship. No one would say a third rate is not a well-designed watership of the age of sail. But again, you talk about it, and it's you start to go frigates. Most of the frigates we talk about in history are fifth rates. They're fifth rates, as they're called.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, no one is going to sit there and say that even a Burke or a Sejong the Great or whatever has the same kind of striking power as a Ford class supercarrier.
No.
So you are already accepting that there are gradations to the offensive power of your surface warships. So you could even argue, actually, to be honest, at that point, you could even argue that the first rate, if you're thinking about it in terms of the rate of sail, the first rate is the carrier.
Yeah.
Because it's the big, mean thing that you spend infinite money on to have maximum strike power. And in the US Navy's case, the Burke is already the third rate because it's the workhorse that is the bulk of the fleet on the front lines, at which point the frigate is
the fifth rate.
It's the fifth rate.
It is.
It's the old cruiser mission, but it's the escort, it's the messenger, it's the outer environ of the fleet. And that's basically what the modern frigate is supposed to be doing. And essentially, what you're looking at with the Constellation program now is, or as it is or was, I guess now, is they've essentially tried to do the equivalent of, which interestingly enough they didn't do in the Age of Sail. Is the equivalent of in the Age of Sail somebody going, oh, the Americans have got 24-pounder frigates, we'll just rearm some fifth rates from 18-pounder to 24-pounder and then be surprised when it keels over. It's like, even in the Age of Sail they didn't do that. They went, let's build some bigger ships or cut down some even bigger ships into smaller ones, and you end up with kind of the fourth rate re-emerging as a big frigate rather than a small capital ship. But yeah, they've done the equivalent of taking a decentish 18-pounder design and tried to slap 24 or 32-pounders on it, and then they're surprised when it doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think this is the problem. I think people honestly are trying to approach these things as if everything's got to be able to fight everything to the best of its ability. I call it the top trumpification of war. This is the top trump stats of the individual ships. And it's not the ships. You're building a team of the ships. You have multiple ships in this task group. It's not the value of the individual unit. It's how they come together as a group. And they're missing that out. Oh, well. Anyway.
It'll be interesting to see how this matches up with what Jamie and Sal think.
I think it's going to be it'll be a fun video. I hope people enjoy it when they're hearing it. And as I said, we're gonna try and do specials for Bilgepumps because it is a nice thing to grow up together. We do like getting together and chatting each other. I know we managed to spectacularly fail this point. We got one meeting where it was the 3 original Bilgepumpers, another one where it was everyone minus you, and realistically, I was prepared for us to do another one where it ended up being everyone minus me, and then everyone minus Jamie, and then it's Sal. Oh, well, it was fun. Anyway, anything you think we should put in at the end here? Because this will go at the end. Anything? Is there anything you'd like to see included in the decision making process for the future frigates for any navy?
I think I come back to something I mention semi-occasionally on my channel, which is go back to the warrior principle, which is work out what you want first, make sure all the bits exist for you to attain that capability, make sure they work, and then go, okay, this is what the capability we want, this is the systems we're going to use to deliver that capability, we will now build a hull to contain those things, and to a certain extent, it costs what it costs.
Yeah.
Not all this kind of, well, we're going to do a thing. We don't know how capable the thing is going to be. We don't know what systems we're going to put on the thing, but we're going to start building the thing, and because then that's how you end up with this. And the LCSs, and the Zumwalts, and to a certain extent, the Type 45s, and so on and so on and so on and so forth. It's like, think first, build later. I mean, even carpenters and people in the trades, measure twice, cut once. This is the equivalent of someone going, I want to build myself a timber frame house, and I've got a nail gun, and I've got a saw, and I've got a pack of random wood I bought from the local hardware store, and they're halfway through putting up 16 different shaped frames or out of 14 different cuts of wood before they realized they maybe should have thought about this before they started hammering.
You got a neighbor like that too.
Yeah.
I have someone down the road who's literally done that. And they're now buying a pack and demolishing what they built. And I was trying to be helpful to them, but I was also looking at it going, have you got any building experience? No, but this looked really easy when I looked at it on a YouTube channel.
Yeah, everything looks easy when it's done on a YouTube channel because people don't see all the work that goes into it from behind the scenes.
Also, the person who's doing it on the YouTube channel is probably already an expert in the field and probably knows what they're doing. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing a YouTube channel about it, I'd hope.
You'd hope, yeah. I was going to say, good, big qualification on making sure the people who are doing the YouTube channel actually know what they're doing in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh well.
Thank you, everyone, for watching.
Yeah, thank you for listening, everyone. And, well, see you in the next Bilgepumps special, whenever that happens to be. When the stars align once more.
Ah, yes, when they align. So, thank you, and you have been watching and listening to Sal Merculago, the wonderful What is Going On with Shipping. Myself, Alex Clarke, and hopefully you enjoy my channel of my name. Jamie Seedell of Armoured Carriers, the wonderful Australian, and of course, Drakenafel himself, Alex, who is here always.
Thank you very much for watching. I hope you're going to have an absolutely fantastic Christmas. The very day this video comes out, I'm going to be recording the Friday before Christmas video. I'm still picking the story for that video. Last year I did it was the night before Christmas, and all through the house. Not a single fig stir, not even a mouse. But we'll see which one I go with this year. I'm considering the snowman. I know it's maybe not everyone's cup of tea, but I do like it, and it's one of the ones I do like to read my little cousins on Christmas Eve when I do Christmas Eve story time. So yeah, that's going to be fun. Also, next Thursday is Christmas Day. This comes out. So that's going to be the Thursday, but also going to be live as normal the day after this, and then there's going to be a Thursday the following week, which is Christmas Day. So I'm moving a live that week to the Saturday. So there's going to be a live on the day after Boxing Day, and then there's going to be the normal live on Sunday. But I thought I'd put a live on that Saturday because I wanted to chat with everyone, and, well, you know, I enjoy lives. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and take care. And normally I would put a question at the end of videos, but I never did it with Bilgepumps. And please say, the one thing I'm going to ask is, if you liked the way I put this together, if you think it was better, or should I have mixed the editing and mixed the bits in together? Would that have been better? And also, whether you'd like us to do more specials like this in future. If you liked this way, a methodology of specials, because I think we can probably do this. And when events are good, we get together, we do a special, and we organize it. Or rather, I send off a load of emails and keep emailing people until we all get free time. They'll take it in turns, in the nicest way. The next one will probably be organised by Drac or Jamie. Jamie's always a reliable organiser. We're all busy, but we do take it in turns. Anyway, I'd really love to know what you think and whether you enjoyed it and whether you'd like more like this. Thank you very much, and take care. And again, happy Christmas. Hope you have a wonderful time. Hope you have company, find company wherever you can, and I hope you have a really nice day and really good food, because company, good food, and a nice day is, for me, what Christmas ultimately is all about. There are so many other parts of history for it, but ultimately it's a time for family. Good company, good food. Hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.